Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adrienne Mandez, and I want to thank you all for joining the DWLADAYL Women's Mentoring Circle virtual presentation, Wired for Work, What is Your Brain Wired For? Brain Fitness in a Post-COVID Workplace. This is the third large group program for our 2021 Women's Mentoring Circle, but thanks to our two law firm sponsors, Foley & Lardner and Greenberg Traurig, this program is made open to everyone. Given our wider audience, we wanted to sort of give a little bit of background on the Women's Mentoring Circle. And so this is our 6th year. It is through a partnership of the Dallas Women Lawyers Association and the Dallas Association of Young Lawyers, with the intent of fostering a community for women lawyers in Dallas who are united in the common goal of watching women succeed in this profession. The program promotes the development, advancement, and retention of female lawyers through mentorship, education, and community building activities. This year, we've tailored our 2021 programming to the theme Thriving in the New Normal. With that theme and building on our previous 2 large group programmings, Embracing the New Normal and Finding Fulfillment in Your Career, the Women Mentoring Circle Committee came together and realized that a lot of firms are opening back up and calling everyone to the office. And so now was the perfect time for a program dedicated to providing valuable and tangible lessons on how to mentally survive and thrive as we all transition back into a pre-COVID office lifestyle with a post-COVID mentality. I want to thank the Women Mentoring Circle Committee and once again our sponsors, Foley & Lardner and Greenberg Traurig, for making this program happen. I am going to turn it over to Avinet Gezahan to introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, everyone. My name is, again, Avinet Gezahan, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dee O'Neill. Ms. O'Neill, the keynote speaker and the founder of NeuroCognitive Fitness, a concierge brain fitness assessment and training practice to help clients better understand how their brain works and how to make it work better. By first using advanced neurotechnology to assess neurocognition via brain mapping, cognitive testing, and standardized metrics, then secondly, enhancing brain fitness through customized training programs. Dee has uniquely specialized education experience in neuroscience, neurotechnology, along with coaching and counseling to effortlessly translate complex brain science principles into practical practices to not only manage, but maximize brain fitness. Dee has a Master's of Science, a graduate degree in psychology from Chaminade University of Honolulu, and her undergrad work was in human health and exercise science at the University of Hawaii. I just want to thank again Ms. O'Neill for being here today, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Avinet and Adrienne and Maria, for the invitation to be here. And I see some familiar names from past times when I've spoken at DWLA, so glad to see some familiar faces and names. I will ask if anyone's up for it to put on your video just so I can see some faces. I love being more live and in person. So if I can see your faces, I'll be able to get a better gauge of what you're experiencing and what you're thinking. And this will be pretty interactive. I'll be asking you to do some polls and enter in the chat box. So make sure you have your chat box open so that you can enter some of the questions in there. And thank you all for putting on a lot of cameras. Thank you. So before we jump right into some of the specifics of what we're going to talk about today, I want to kick off with a quick poll to ask you all, thinking about this scale, on a scale of 0 to 4, just so I get a gauge of where a lot of you are at currently. How often do you think about your own brain health? So 0, never. I'm going to go ahead and start a poll here so you can actually enter a number here. Okay, I'm gonna launch this one. I'm learning polls. So how often do you think about your brain? 0, never, 1, rarely, 2, occasionally, 3, often, 4, very often. We'll give it a couple seconds to let that tabulate. Kind of getting a little bit in each of them. Great, thank you all. Okay, I think most people have voted, 77%. So interesting. So you guys are a high performing group and, super professional. So I'm glad to see that nobody said never. That's a good sign. And maybe because the topic here is about brain science, that that's not the right answer. But interesting that the majority looks like occasionally, right? So people like right in the middle, sometimes, occasionally. And I like to get this gauge because when I often have some nevers, at least a few in larger groups, and that kind of gives me pause because there's so much that we know about brain health and brain optimization that if people never think about it, then I feel like they're missing out on some really important information. And then sometimes when I see a lot in the very often side of that scale, that's usually coming from a place of like worry, concern, or fear. Maybe they have a kiddo or a family member with something neurological, a brain injury or ADHD or anxiety. So I like to see kind of more in the middle where people are thinking about it, but not from a place of worry or fear, because there is so much optimistic things that we know about brain health and things that we can do to mitigate things like dementia. So we'll cover some of those topics today. I'm gonna go ahead and close out that poll. Thank you all for playing along with me. And for the second question here, if you'll enter in the chat box, the answer to this question: what are some things that you're currently doing kind of day to day, part of your rituals or practices that you know or you think is really helping your brain perform at its best? And just write those things in the chat box. And give a couple seconds so we can see that. So they're starting to come in. So yoga, journaling, walking outside, anti-inflammation diet, great. Deep breaths when stressed, exercise, getting some rest occasionally. Yoga, sleeping, exercise, sleep, running, great exercise. Getting 8 hours of sleep, yay there, Paige. Eating healthy, podcasts, okay. Mindfulness, meditation, again, walking, deep breaths, awesome. Oh, I love this one, quality time with friends and family. Okay, Jennifer, you're not horrible, right? Don't regularly do anything aimed at brain health. Well, after today, you will, and you'll have some really practical and tactical things to do. Awesome, that's really helpful to see kind of what you guys are already doing. So now let me go ahead and jump right into what we're going to cover today. And if you've seen me speak before, you know, my kind of goal and what I try to always do is transform maybe complex neuroscience into things that are just really practical and relevant so that we can apply them each day in our day-to-day life. So we're going to kind of go through and explore how are our brains likely impacted just from normal everyday stress and maybe burnout, but particularly in this COVID, sort of post-COVID world, especially going back to the workplace. And then what are these tools and strategies that might be useful? There might be some that you're already doing. A lot of you are already doing a lot of them, except Jennifer. And so but she will after this. And then, you know, maybe you'll hear some that you're already doing, but hear more of the science behind it. And then maybe you'll, or possibly you'll hear some brand new things. So hopefully there's some new information or some new insights during this time together. And then lastly, we'll try to fit in a little bit, but I'll kind of leave you with hopefully the further reflection on how can you apply this to your both personal and professional life within teams for more collaboration and communication. So my one last question I'll ask you to ponder on before we jump into the science is, if I were to ask you in just a word or a couple words, what would you say your brain is currently wired for? Left to its own devices, where does your brain go when you're kind of mind wandering? And enter that into the chat box if you would. A word, a couple words, what is your brain wired for currently? Worry, right? It's supposed to say thinking, your to-do list, work, stress, anticipating confrontation, work, all the things. Love that, Chelsea. Surviving day to day, taking care of people, right? We're caregivers, lack of time, to-do list, work deadlines, school work balance. Yeah, gosh, you guys have a lot going on. Wedding stress. Oh, there's no stress there, huh? General stress, work, school work balance, planning for the future, right? Great. Those are really great answers to start thinking about when our mind wanders, where does it go? Because that'll be kind of the key topic of what do we want it to be wired for? And this goes along with the science. Most people will say more of that stress, worry, anxiety. And I used to get most of those answers before COVID. So it's not anything new, but I think we're living in a really unique time where it's exacerbated. And everyone not only has all those individual stresses, whether it's work or a wedding or school, but now we all have the stress of a pandemic, right? So it's almost added on to everything else we already had going on. Yes, so as Candace just said, COVID-19 stress, right? It's kind of its own animal here. And what I think is so key for people to understand is that our brain is not wired necessarily from birth to help us be happy. right? Or really be sort of every day embracing all the joy and wondrous things in our life. Our brain is really designed to just keep us alive. And I know in some of the pre-meetings for this, we're trying to shift from surviving to thriving. And I think one of the important things to know is that our brain honestly is geared or really built to just help us survive. It's really a pattern recognition machine, meaning making, and really just looking for threats to our environment. And so if that's what it's wired to do normally, imagine in today's COVID world, everything's kind of a threat, even seeing people in mass or wondering, you hear someone cough or something, you're wondering, do they have COVID? So there's just so many more stressors in everything that our brain is seeing. And sometimes that's just unconscious. So it's a great thing, right? Because it keeps us alive. It keeps us from stepping off the curb and into traffic or doing really dangerous things. But it also can get in the way when we allow it to stay in that sort of default mode. And the default mode network, I'm just going to touch on this really briefly because it helps kind of sum up why it's built that way. So default sounds like it is. Where does your brain go just by autopilot or by default? Most people, it goes to that rumination, that worry, the stress that a lot of you pointed out. And when our mind wanders, it tends to go to things like obviously off task. You're working on something, your mind goes, squirrel, goes to something else completely unrelated. And so we have less attention, we have less situational awareness. Our memory is impacted, we're less productive. And studies are showing really depression and anxiety really increase, so lower quality of life just overall. And what I think is so important as a counselor, we have this paradigm of when someone comes in with a lot of depression, sometimes they're worried about something from the past and kind of stuck in regret or something from that happened way back. Or if they're really anxious, sometimes they're more worried about something or anticipating something in the future. So when they're not in that mindful time or in the present, they tend to be future or past, and that can lead to different types of psychological and physiological challenges. And so let's jump quickly to see what are the costs of this, of stress and things like multitasking, distractions in the office. A lot of studies have shown about a third of employees, and these are pre-COVID statistics, so I suspect this is a lot higher now. A third of employees just feel stress on the job. Almost half of American workers, are tired during the day because they aren't getting that regenerative, restorative sleep at night. So that's a huge cost to companies. And also about a third just feels this constant nervousness, anxious, irritable, anger, and extreme fatigue due to that stress. This statistic is kind of alarming. Upwards of 90% of primary care doctor visits are somehow related or could be boiled down to just stress, causing some sort of physical or health issue. And startlingly, only 3% of those people actually receive resources that can build up their capacity or build up their resilience to these inevitable stressors. Sometimes it's just a quick fix or something that's not really helpful or beneficial. And so one last thing here to have you start thinking about.
I don't think your slides are up on the screen.
Oh.
If you're trying to show them.
Let me see. I wonder why it went away. Is it now?
No.
Let me close this out and see. Sorry. Now?
There you go.
Okay. How strange. Okay. Sorry about that. So here's some things I'd like to think about as we go back into the workplace and we're thinking about some of these impacts as far as cost, but also productivity and profit. I like to think about how many times a day do you think the average person, and I'll ask you to enter this in the chat box, how often does the average person just check their phone? Pick up their phone and look at it and check for messages or check what they've missed. How many times per day do you think the average person does? This is of course not us because none of us are average. Let me see where my chat box is. Everything shifted when I did that. Okay. 300, 170, 50, 100 plus. So great guesses there and kind of all over the place, you can see. The average is about 150. And I think that is actually kind of low. You know, there are different apps that you can go to see. And I think even now the settings will actually tell you how many times or how much time you're spending on your phone too. And so it's good, just awareness, because technology is playing a really interesting part in our brain health and our brain stress. So just being aware of how often we're using it productively, or is it actually getting in the way? And then how often do you think that flashed up there? How often are you able say you're at work, you're working on something deep in thought, maybe a report or something that you're going to have to present at work. How long can you work without being interrupted? Whether it is your phone or emails or even your own brain going to something else. How long can you work? About 20 minutes? Yep. 4 minutes? Kind of depends, right? Depends on what you're doing and how that day is going. But the studies have shown most people, it's like less than 3 minutes. We have so many distractions and interruptions, but oftentimes it is largely just our own brain, again, going to something else and causing that distraction. And because that's the only thing we can ultimately control, that's what we'll talk about today, is some of those strategies. And so you're working on something, you get distracted every 1 to 3 minutes, or maybe a little bit longer if you're really deep in thought and you're really intentionally focusing. But how long do you think it would take your brain to get back to where it was after that interruption? How much time is lost during those interruptions? I see that, 23 minutes, 7 minutes. This is kind of the startling thing. And you guys, some of you may have read the studies. It's about 20 minutes. So the time that we lose in productivity and getting things done when we have so many interruptions and distractions can be pretty startling, both personally and professionally. It can be up to a 40% decrease in productivity. So if there are any things that we can do to help change that, maybe we can impact our own productivity as well as profit for companies. And so the idea is really going from this more transactional to more transformational brain performance by implementing some pretty simple tools. And as professionals and high performers, as you all are here today, you may have heard of this thing called the Yerke-Dodson law, which is that stress isn't always a bad thing. Kind of just by a show of hands, who would say that extra, gear kind of helps you perform at your best sometimes, right? I see some hands and some head nodding. You probably got to where you are in your career because you almost thrive at that sort of extra adrenaline and even cortisol. That stress hormone helps you perform at your best. But from this slide, you can tell it's a very small sweet spot of that optimal arousal before it turns into more chronic and sort of debilitating, unproductive stress. So the key is to kind of get in that sweet spot of stress more easily, effectively, and efficiently. One of the things I came across as I was really preparing for this talk specifically is throughout, I think, the COVID research, what a lot of scientists are finding is something they're calling psychological immune system. And this is the idea that we as humans possess this host of cognitive and emotional capacities that really help us make the best of even the worst situations, right? Which most of us know this just from normal life, that we tend to get through things that maybe, if 2 years ago someone had said, we're going to have this huge pandemic, we're all going to have to stay home for weeks or months at a time, we probably would all be like, oh my God, I wouldn't survive something like that. And we all did, right? We all got through something like unimaginable in the past. There's a lot of research to show that even like when you're worried about something, it tends to not be nearly as stressful or as worrisome when it actually happens. But by the same token, when we're thinking about a vacation we're taking or that wedding upcoming, or something wonderful we're anticipating, sometimes we almost don't experience that even quite as well. It's that anticipation or the expectation that kind of sets the tone of how we are interpreting it. And so it really is self-protective. And so how can we really boost that psychological immune system to even be more beneficial? Another thing I came across, all the bad mind wandering I just talked about, there's a brand new study that just came out actually this month in one of my favorite out of UC Berkeley, the Greater Good Science Center. They have a magazine, and they've done a study on daydreaming. And what they're finding is so compelling is that their science showed that when our mind wandering goes towards more pleasant and playful thoughts, it actually improves our mood a lot, obviously, and it really fosters more creativity. And so what they found, which I'm a brain nerd, I look at brain waves all the time using EEG technology. What they found was that in this state of like pleasant and playful mind wandering, instead of rumination and worry and negative mind wandering, they found more alpha waves in the frontal lobe of the brain, in the executive functioning part of the brain. We call it the boss of the brain. So kind of a more calm, steady brainwave pattern, allowing for more creativity, more divergent thinking, which is taking in lots of ideas, kind of outside the box thinking, which I think probably as attorneys is something that you really thrive on, having kind of more creative and innovative thinking, as well as convergent thinking, which is that decision making and problem solving. And so I love that they kind of summed up with the context and content of our mind wandering is really what sets the tone for how we perform beyond that. And so the tools I'm going to share with you now as we go through this I like to think of them as antidotes to that autopilot anxiety. The first tool I want to share with you, I'm not sure if I mentioned, you'll be getting some resources at the end through a complimentary ebook, as well as some of these key slides I'll be sending you a PDF of as well. So you'll get these takeaways. I have working with many clients over many years, I try to simplify what I call brain basics. What are the fundamental things that need to be in place before we can kind of get our most optimal brain performance for reasoning, decision making, and ultimate work performance? And I called it basics because they really are fundamental to that. So one easy one, breathing. It's so simple, and people sometimes think, oh, okay, of course I'm breathing. But many of us are really shallow breathing most of the time, especially when we're stressed or under that sort of chronic stress state. And what the science is really showing is this connection from our brain to our heart to our gut. One of my largest referrals to my private practice is a pediatric GI doc, where she sees a lot of kiddos with gut issues. They're nauseous, they feel sick all the time, but it's not their gut that's having issues, it's their brain. And it's that connection through the vagus nerve, which is the largest nerve in the body, going from the brain to the gut, causing those gut issues. So if you notice for yourself, you ever have more stomach issues and it's not attributed to something really in your gut, it could be brain health related. And the same thing to the heart. There's more neurons going from the heart and the brain than to any other parts of the body. So simple breathing, and when I say that, it's really this idea of taking slow, deep breaths. The easiest one I like to do is what the Navy SEALs practice too. It's called box breathing. Anyone here box breathing? Show of hands. Not many people. And so it's the idea of inhaling for 4 seconds, and then you're holding for 4 seconds. So you can imagine a box of inhaling for 4, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and then again holding. The vagus nerve, which is really sort of the break of anxiety in our brains, is activated when our exhale is longer than our inhale. So anytime before something stressful, if you can just focus on a 4 or 5 second inhale and then exhaling a little bit longer, it's amazing how you feel a physiological decrease in your heart rate and your pulse, and that allows for better activation of our thinking part of our brain. The A is for affirmations, and again, something that sounds so simplistic, but when we can actually reframe our thinking from something that's, again, that threat-based or that negative to, and I love how that study said, pleasant and playful thoughts, and not to be like woo-woo or foo-foo about it, but just to know that our physiology and our psychology truly changes when we're thinking different emotions, or having different emotional experiences. And you'll get to have an experience of that here in a few minutes. I love to give the example of Bruce Springsteen. He was interviewed a few years ago on a talk show, and they said, do you get nervous before you perform? And he said he used to, when he first started, he'd get really nervous. He'd be sweating and shaking a little bit. He'd forget words to his songs. And he said, but now that I've been, the boss for so long, he said, now I know that's just my body's way of telling me it's time to rock. So he's reframed the same feelings to something that helps him perform better. So it's simplistic, but it's really quite profound as well. The S is for sleep. So I love it. Several of you mentioned that you're already trying to really focus on getting that 7 to 8 hours of sleep. And that's just that's not a number that was just kind of snatched out of nowhere. What the science shows is during our sleep cycles, we have deep sleep where our body really relaxes. We might wake up a little bit during the night. And then we have REM cycle sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, you've likely heard of. And during this REM cycle, what studies are showing is that our brain actually flushes out toxins during those REM cycles. It's been shown that it's almost like taking the trash out, cleaning out the brain of toxins. And stress, anxiety, those are almost like toxins in the brain. But that clean out only happens during REM cycles, and you only have a REM cycle about every 90 minutes, and each one gets longer throughout sleep. So you want as many of those REM cycles as possible to get the benefits of restorative, regenerative sleep. So that's where the 8 hours comes from. Intake is simplistic of just what are we putting into our body? Water and food for fuel for our bodies and our brains. Staying hydrated obviously is really important. And for brain health, we recommend the MIND diet, MIND. You can Google MIND and it's lots of information. It's more plant-based, less sugar. Alzheimer's, a really specific type of dementia is actually being called diabetes type 3 because it's so impacted by what we eat, and particularly inflammation caused by sugar and a lot of processed foods. So we just know that what we eat is so key to daily as well as long-term brain health and brain performance. Cardio, a lot of you said exercise, so you know the benefits of exercise, but getting the heart rate up really helps, again, clear out more of those toxins. But also there's something called brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is what happens in the brain when we particularly do cardio exercise. And that factor has been called miracle grow for the brain. It actually helps build new brain cells, build more neurogenesis, so the brain is more robust and healthy, so can impact or can take on any kind of injuries or disease with less impact to performance. And I love it. Somebody said when I asked about what you're already doing, that social piece, because I hardly ever hear that, but allowing kind of more playful and laughter and spending time with people that we enjoy being with, which again, this past 18 months has been really hard. And this is actually Social Wellness Month. So hopefully people are focusing on that and really making it a priority. So you'll get a slide again of these basics. I just love it. It's a way to keep it top of mind and to really simplify it. This is the whole talk on its own, but if you want any of the science behind it, I'm happy to share that. And so I had this little metric, if you want to do a quick self-check of your own brain basics, kind of thinking about how often are you doing each of these things, and you can just rate yourself here, you don't have to share it. And this will be in your takeaway as well, so you'll get to self-check. And when I use this with my clients, I'm really just trying to see maybe which one are you scoring the lowest in, and maybe spend some time focusing on that one more intentionally. Sometimes when people say, you're telling me a lot of stuff that I need to be doing or need to be thinking about doing, what's the most important thing? And when I get asked that, I have to say sleep, just because it is so key to being able to attack everything that we have to attack each day. And so if you did score this up for yourself, or you'll have it in the takeaway again, if you score really low, it might be, again, really intentionally implementing some of these, or you may have already really good habits in place, and you may be at the higher end where you're already optimizing your brain fitness. So now let's jump into, in this last 10 minutes or so that we'll cover this content, thinking about going back to your workplace. Some of you look like you're already back there, but and if you are back there, or if you're about to go back there, what are some things that you think are going to be obstacles, or what are some things that are going to make it more challenging to have your best brain performance in the workplace in today's world. So enter in the chat box there. What are some things you think are going to be obstacles to navigating workplace in this new world? Let's see if any of those get entered into here. Are you guys seeing anything pop? Okay, less predictable than before, hard to find a routine, again, new routines. Yeah, and so the time we save working from home, right? Exactly, not having to wear pants. Frequent interruptions, right? The COVID-19 variant, food choices. Yeah, these are a really good one. New mom, figuring out how to balance going into the office. A lot of people are saying their priorities kind of changed when they found out how nice it was to have that autonomy and flexibility from working from home. And yeah, maybe more interruptions, right? A lot of studies were showing that we weren't having the same social connections that we would have normally had in a workplace, but we had a lot of benefits by being able to just control our time more and maybe do the things that we want to do more of, and eating healthier at home. Great ideas. And so those will largely fall into these main 3 buckets that I've come up with to then show what might be an obstacle, and then what's maybe one opportunity or one strategy to help implement and to overcome that obstacle. The first one, and was sort of mentioned there, is just this stimulus overload, probably going to cause sort of this attention deficit in all of our brains, that we're just going to have so much going on that it's going to be hard to navigate in this new world. The second one is stress and burnout, right? Again, gotten used to these new routines and the new habits, it's going to be hard to maybe get back into the old ones. And then the stress of handling all of that. And the last one, which we'll just briefly touch on, is this idea of complacency or status quo. Maybe we're doing kind of things more habitually, and are there ways that we could see things a little bit more in a broader landscape? So we're going to tackle each one and just give one practical strategy for each one. I love this quote by Herbert Simon. A wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. So with so much coming at us, the stimulus overload, it's hard for us to really pay attention, right? So as a quick little brain challenge here, if we were in person, I'd have you pairing up and doing it together, which is kind of fun. But I'll challenge you to kind of just do it at your desk right now, wherever you're sitting, as a little brain challenge of how this attention deficit affects our performance. So here's going to be the fun thing we're going to do. I want you to take your right hand, and your left hand can just be on your lap or hanging down. Don't use your left hand at all. Just your right hand. You're going to go through this cycle: rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. You've probably played the game, but all you're going to do right now for a few seconds is go rock, paper, scissors. Count how many cycles of that do you get in a short time frame till I say stop, okay? So, and you have to start over each time you make a mistake. So when I say go, you're going to start going rock, paper, scissors, rock, paper, scissors. However many cycles of that as you can get, just count in your head. Ready? This is a fun game. Okay, everybody, right hand, go. Count how many cycles. Rock, paper, scissors. See a lot of hands going. Nice. Okay, good. We'll stop there. How many cycles? Maybe just show some fingers of how many cycles you got. So a lot of 4s, 5s, some 3s. Okay, awesome. Great. Now for the second part, put your right hand down, this time just your left hand, and you're going to do this cycle. You're going to pat your tummy once, snap once, pat your tummy twice, snap twice, pat 3 times, snap 3 times, and then start over. That's the cycle. 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, and keep going. Okay, ready? Just left hand, go. This will be fun to watch in the recording later. Okay, we'll stop there. It's a little bit longer, but how many cycles did people get on that one? I'm seeing some 3s, 2s, 4s. Okay, great. Okay, now to wrap up this challenge, you're going to do both those things at the same time. So both your hands are going to be going. Your right hand's doing rock, paper, scissors. Your left hand's doing the pat, snap, snap, snap. Okay, everybody all together. I wish more videos were on. Okay, both hands ready, go. It's so fun to see. I see some smiles starting to happen. Good, right? Anybody doing it? Feel successful? Lynn's like, heck no. Yeah, right. And so it's just a silly way for people to kind of experience that when we think we're doing two things at the same time, even a simple task like this, when the brain has to think even a little bit about whatever it's working on, it's just kind of a freeze moment, right? Because there's a competition, it's an either or, either you're able to focus on one thing and you're toggling back and forth. You can't do two things at the same time. When we think we're multitasking, we're actually not. And what the studies are showing around multitasking is higher cortisol, higher stress levels. We're more distracted, worse learning. The brain shrinks a little bit, less working memory, which is that short-term attention, and creativity or problem-solving, fluid intelligence. So the takeaway message is really, is our mind full and lots going on, multitasking, distracted, or are we mindful and kind of more in the moment? How often are you seeing this, right? Out in public, at home, at work? We're all so distracted really by our technology, by our phones. And so one study I want to share to wrap up this obstacle, there's a study done actually through UTD here, that when our phones are out on our desk, and I can't see any of your desks, but I bet your cell phone is somewhere close in your vicinity, in your field of vision likely. And what this study showed was when our phone is in our visual field, what happens is our brain is slightly distracted by it, wondering if it's going to ring. Are you missing a call? Are you missing an email? And so our working memory, our short-term attention, as well as our problem solving is really impacted. And it didn't matter if it was on the desk, it was most affected, it most took away some of our attention and focus and productivity. If it was in your purse or in a bag, sort of a little bit away, but still in the same room, it was a little bit better. But actually, it has to be in a different room, kind of out of sight, out of mind, for it to not be kind of pulling part of our cognitive capacity. And the most startling piece of this was that it didn't matter if it was your phone or someone else's phone. And so when you're in those meetings where there's 5 or 6 phones, right? Everyone has all this technology out. There's part of our brain unconsciously distracted by it and not able for us to actually use those cognitive resources. And so the way that we define mindfulness is simply present moment awareness and full attention. And you really can't have that with all these other things pulling away part of that attention. In your takeaways, you are actually in the resources in the ebook, you're going to be able to have this full mindfulness attention awareness scale, which I think is helpful if you're interested to see how mindful are you. It's a much longer scale, but this just gives you a feel for some of those. Are you preoccupied again with that future or past, so that then default mode is activated in a negative way? Do you forget someone's name as soon as you're told their name? People think that's a memory issue, but it's really an attention issue. And then do you feel like you're kind of just running on automatic without kind of intentional or deliberate awareness of what you're doing moment to moment? But you'll get to do the full scale here. And the idea is to have higher scores. And so it's nice to get a metric now. And then if you implement some of these things, seeing your score get better over time. And what the studies have shown is that it's really much better to have less errors and to get more done effectively, to not multitask, but do what's called serial tasking. And I bet a lot of you kind of found that this is how your brain works best anyway, right? You do that deep work, that cognitively demanding task for maybe up to an hour, and maybe you're able to do it for a couple of hours without distractions, and then taking a break, right? Just stepping away, doing something else for a little bit, maybe some of the tasks that don't require so much brain power, and then, or even just a walk around the block or walk around the office. That really helps us come back more recharged. So the first simple strategy for that first obstacle is just being consciously aware in the moment and trying to keep our attention on one thing at a time as much as possible. The second obstacle we'll cover now is stress and burnout, and we'll wrap up these last couple in just the next 3 or 4 minutes. This is another self-check that you'll have in your takeaway. How much stress are you currently having? This is a validated checklist called the DAS, Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scale. But you can see by kind of rating how often you're finding it hard to wind down, overreacting, a lot of nervous energy, agitated. again, measuring this, and this is the score you'd want to have start coming down so that you're not scoring as high on some of these metrics of what stress looks like in our day-to-day. Just for sake of time, we won't have you do that now, but it will be in your takeaway. And so why is this important? Why do we want to really get a handle on stress? And here's kind of the simplistic brain science of it. When we're thinking, when you're preparing for, some of your high performing tasks at work, your frontal lobe, so the very front part of your brain, again, those executive functions, so problem solving, decision making, emotional regulations, all those things are kind of mitigated or regulated from your frontal lobe, and it helps the rest of your brain be really activated and alert. When we get stressed, this tiny part in the middle part of our brain called the amygdala. Many of you have probably heard of the amygdala. It's the limbic, sort of more primitive part of the brain. When it gets activated, if we're upset, angry, overly worried about something, the frontal lobe goes offline. Both can't be active at the same time. It's really an either or phenomenon. And so it's so important to be able to calm down that stress response so that our frontal lobe, our better thinking, is actually online. Here's a really much more simplified way of looking at that, right? We have this caveman or cavewoman on the inside of our brain that kind of takes over and is more primitive than our more reasoning brain. And this is an example here of a normal brain cell. And then when our brains are really stressed, that cortisol stress hormone saturates our brain, and it really kills off connections between brain cells. So I'll tell a lot of my executive groups, stress can make you stupid because you just don't get your best thinking when you're under a lot of stress. And it actually is hurting our brain cells when it's chronic and unmitigated. And it's getting the best, if you're feeling like you're feeling changes in your body and your brain, headaches, low energy, weakened hormonal, and our immune system is impacted. And so remember when I asked you to think back to what is your brain wired for? I want you to think back to that, what you had said. And then I'm going to show you a really short video. It's about 45 seconds with two different kind of scenarios. And so thinking about the way you felt your brain was already wired, and then watch this video and you might get a sense of the impact of the way our brain is automatically wired. So just sit back and watch this 45-second video, and I'll ask you to reflect on it on the other side. Can you hear it okay? So when I show that to large groups, I sometimes have people say, well, there was two different visual scenarios, but it wasn't, right? It was the same scenario, but just with the music playing in the background. I wonder if you maybe felt a different sort of interpretation or feeling around that scenario. So you saw it ended with that phrase, you see the world through how you feel. And that really is that reframing that depending on how we're feeling, we're going to experience things really differently. So this is why handling stress and burnout can be so important. The group that I'm certified through doing some stress management tools called HeartMath, their research has shown that even these subtle depleting emotions that are kind of quiet in the background really kind of is draining our inner battery. It's like leaving your car running or leaving the lights on after you've turned off the car, right? It slowly but definitely drains the battery. And that feeling you get when your cell phone has that red low battery icon and you panic a little bit because you can't have a dead phone. I would encourage you that when you feel your brain battery getting low as well, that you recharge and find a way to really build up that energy. You'll also have in the resources a way to measure this. How disposed are you to have more positive emotions? And you'll get to go through some of those. It's also a validated scale called dispositional positive emotion scale. Again, trying to get higher scores, showing that you're just maybe going to more of those playful and pleasant thoughts rather than some of the negative ones. So the simple second strategy there is our mindset, right? Cultivating more positive, regenerative emotions, and looking for more opportunities to kind of have a more pleasant experience. The last one here is autopilot, just 2 slides on this one. If anyone's read the work of Daniel Kahneman, and a couple of hands there, I see some heads nodding, a Nobel laureate for this concept of thinking fast and slow. Our brains have 2 systems. The first one is that kind of fast, automatic intuition, the first problem, the first answer that you want to come to, or solution to a problem that you come up with. But then there's a second system that if we allow our brains time to really reflect more, spend more time really thinking about all of that, that's the more sort of analytical and more reasoned part of our brain. But we have to really slow down that first part, or at least give our brain time to get to that system too. And so this is what we call in brain science, this idea of metacognition. And a researcher described it this way: that critical thinking is thinking about your thinking while you're thinking in order to have better thinking. How nice would it be if everyone you were meeting every day and your clients and your coworkers were thinking about what they were thinking about in order to have better thinking? And so the way I kind of wrap that up, and again, it's kind of a whole separate talk, but I'm calling it Mindscape, where we're encouraging, challenging yourself to reflect deeper when you can, when it's important, when it matters to you, with more curiosity and possibility thinking. And the way we define resilience through my HeartMath partnership, resilience is that capacity, so it can be improved and built up, capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress, challenge, or adversity, because those aren't going away, right? Especially in today's COVID world. So hopefully some of these tools will help prepare, recover, and adapt to those, because it is really more about recharging and recovering, which a lot of times is busy female professionals, we don't always do, rather than trying to endure through all of that. I'm going to wrap up here with a couple of resources. If you go to this, it's called theexpogroup.com/wired4wonder, and this is also in your PDF. There's an ebook with all this information and more, as well as all those metrics and scales if you want to jump into those. And a couple of resources I'll share with you that are other partners of mine. There's an app called Joyages, and they're really corporate focused, and they're nice because it's almost like having a little brain coach in an app. And they work with companies to help kind of make it more of a team collaborative type of resource. And Monique Rhodes is a friend and colleague of mine. She has an app called the 10-Minute Mind, great mindfulness meditations, and she teaches kind of more longer term courses as well. So I'm going to stop there, and happy to take any questions or comments, and all of my contact information is on there as well. If anyone has any offline questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you afterwards. And other than that, I'll turn it back to Adrienne.
All righty. Does anybody have any questions they want to throw out in the comment section real quick before I wrap it up? All right. Well, you always have her information. Dee, that was an amazing presentation. Thank you so much. Once again, I want to thank our sponsors, Foley and Lardner and Greenberg Traurig. A few housekeeping notes. The materials that Dee mentioned throughout will be sent to everyone. For those of you in the mentoring circles, please remember to meet in your small groups either in August or September. Our next and last of the year large group program is going to be October 13th. So make sure to mark your calendars for that. And if anyone is not in the mentoring circle, but is really interested in joining, feel free to reach out. We would love to help you get connected. And with that, I will go ahead and sign off and thank everybody for joining us. And again, Dee, that was an amazing presentation.
Thank you all so much. My pleasure.